This episode is brought to you by Honeysuckle White. If you're looking for ways to make mealtime healthier in the new year, make your favorite recipes with turkey from Honeysuckle White. Take the pressure off. Keep it simple and tasty without sacrificing flavor for nutrition. Whether you want a delicious sandwich or post-workout protein, Honeysuckle White turkey can do it all. Visit honeysucklewhite.com for recipe inspiration and to find retailers near you. Honeysuckle White. Eat what you love.
The Love Affair event is on at Whole Foods Market with deals on delicious desires through February 14th. The floral department's in full bloom, so look for savings on double dozen bunches of roses. In the meat and seafood departments, save on animal welfare certified New York strip steaks and sustainable wild-caught lobster tails to make the night sizzle. Gifts from the wellness and beauty department are always a nice touch. And you have to grab those chocolate-dipped strawberries. Make Whole Foods Market your Valentine's Day destination.
In 1992, director Emil Ardolino and star Whoopi Goldberg gave the world a rollickingly fun film full of mobsters, chorus numbers, and nuns.
In 2024, we continue our appreciation for Catholicism with a brand that knows a thing or two about resurrection.
The film is Sister Act.
The whiskey is O.K.I. Reserve.
And we'll review them both. This is
the Film and Whiskey Podcast. Welcome to the Film and Whiskey Podcast, where each week we review a classic movie and a glass of whiskey. I'm Bob Book.
I'm Brad G.
And this week we are in the year 1992 to look at one of the highest grossers for that year, Sister Act. Now, Brad, as I recall, this was one of those years where we had to make a tough decision on which film to actually review this week. Folks, if you don't know, perhaps this is your first time joining us, this season on Film and Whiskey, we are reviewing some of the highest grossing films from each year, spanning from 1988 to 2019, and we landed smack dab in 1992, where we were trying to decide between Home Alone 2, Lost in New York, or Sister Act. And having just done Home Alone, a movie that I find delightful and have no ill will towards, I didn't know if I wanted to spend 2 out of, 3 episodes talking about Macaulay Culkin and the Wet Bandits. So, Brad, I've seen the movie now. I know what Sister Act is like, a movie that I had never seen before. And I'm still glad we made this choice.
Yeah, it's nice to have a little bit of a change of pace, right? 2 weeks in a row of Macaulay Culkin might have been a little too much. Even though Home Alone 2 is a great movie, right? You get Donnie Trump in there. It's a good time. Fun film.
Yeah, man, I'm glad we did Sister Act. And I think it's because I texted you after I watched the movie, Brad, and I gave you my final score. And I don't want to spoil my final score for the movie yet, but I will say I enjoyed this movie quite a bit. And part of what I enjoyed about this movie is that it does not have high ambitions. It is an entertainment. That is all it's meant to be. It's a fun little diversion. And I think that even within that category of fun little diversion, it's really well acted. Like, the script is pretty good. Like, the direction is fine. I think they probably could have done a better job with the direction and some choices that are made along the way. But, like, it's a solid movie. And I did not at any point in watching this movie think, I wish I was doing something else, or this is dragging on. At every point of the movie, I was invested, I was entertained, and sometimes that is more than enough.
Yeah, I was actually feeling pretty sick yesterday, and I was sitting in my bed watching it on my laptop, and I was like, well, we're recording tomorrow. I should probably at least watch like 30 or 40 minutes, only have like an hour left. And I watched the entire film. Mm-hmm. I got caught up in it. I was like, wow, this is genuinely a fun little flick. I think that, if I'm being honest, Home Alone kind of falls into a very similar category. Mm-hmm. But it's around Christmas time and it's beloved and we've been watching it for years and years and years. And so that makes it so much more nostalgic and fun. But if I'm being honest, the quality of these two films is somewhat similar.
Mm-hmm. I remember when I was growing up, one of my aunts that we would go visit a couple times a year, she lived like an hour away, but she just had a lot of movies in her house. And it was always, like, it was never the Oscar winners, but it was always a really good representation of what I imagine, you know, the average person in America would have if they collected X number of movies. Like, I remember Forrest Gump being on her shelf, and I remember Braveheart being on her shelf, and, you know, her preferred action stars were always there. I'm sure Die Hard was there, right? But Sister Act is one of those movies that I remember seeing on their shelf, and it's because it was just an absolute phenomenon at the box office. It made $250 million in 1992, which is kind of insane, Brad. I mean, especially for a movie of stakes this small and of a budget this small, to make that much money is, I mean, like, it really struck a chord in the early 90s.
Yeah, there's something about religion and nuns that just really, really knocked it out of the park for everyone.
I just see, like, David Zaslav furiously scribbling at Warner Brothers. More nun content.
All the nuns.
All the nuns, man. All right, hey, well, we're going to get into talking about this movie. But before we get there, we want to say, whether this is your first time listening or if you've been with us from the very beginning, we'd love for you to subscribe to the show on your preferred podcast platform. So wherever you're listening to this, if you want some more Sister Act, I was going to say some more nun action. I don't want to say that at all. If you're enjoying it so far, please hit that subscribe button. Leave us a 5-star review, whether it's on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you listen. You can also find us on all of our social media accounts, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, even on YouTube, at Film Whiskey. Brad, it is time for us to get into America's favorite segment. Are you ready for it?
I am so ready for this.
It's a little segment that we call Brad Explains.
Brad's gonna give us the movie plot with only 60 seconds ticking on the clock. So let's go ahead and hear your take with this little segment that we call Brad Explains.
Brad Explains is the part of the podcast where Brad breaks down the plot of the movie that he has just seen, often for the first time. I'm assuming this was your first time seeing Sister Act. Is that
absolutely,
fair?
Bob?
Okay. Yep. Sometimes I'm right, Brad.
Sometimes you are accurate.
I had a hunch, you know?
Yeah,
right,
I mean, this came out when I was 2 years old, I want to say. So, you know, not necessarily a film when I was 8, 10, 12 years old and able to say, like, yeah, let's watch this movie. It probably rotated out of the Blockbuster, up front section. So I never really saw it. And I didn't have an aunt that had 50 million movies. So.
All right, man, you have 60 seconds on the clock to break down the plot of the film. And what we mean by that is to spoil the hell out of this movie, Brad. You can say anything you want about the happenstance of this movie. You get 1 minute on the clock and go.
Sister Act is a film about Dolores, who is a nightclub singer that witnesses a mob execution. She's moved into police custody and kind of a witness protection program where she joins a convent full of nuns, in which she learns the importance of diligence and discipline, and also reforms the choir to actually sing well. And the Pope comes and visits.
And the movie ends with Pope John Paul II sitting up there in the rafters, just absolutely boogieing.
Just, happy as a clam. He's just kind of like clapping as he shuffles back and forth. It's very, very cute.
All right, man. This movie is one of my favorite types of movies that you saw in the 90s. And I mean, I would say even as recently as like 15 years ago, but you just don't see now because it's not based on a comic book. But that's just the movie that on paper is absolutely preposterous. Like, none of this would happen in real life, but that's why it's a movie. And that's why it's funny. And that's why it works as a comedy. And I just wish that we had more movies like this, where it's like, person sees a crime committed and is put undercover in witness protection with a bunch of white nuns. Yeah. And like, that's the plot of the movie. Because I'm on board already. You know what I mean?
Yeah, 100%. The plot is completely implausible, but the characters that it introduces you to is priceless. And like, that is why this movie works. The nuns in this movie are unique and funny, and they all have distinct personalities, and none of them have like a big overarching crazy story. They're all just interested in being nuns and being kind of fun and having their own little thing. And Whoopi Goldberg has great interactions with them. And Professor McGonagall, Maggie Smith, is just one of our best actresses.
I really want to get into talking about Whoopi Goldberg, but I think we've already established a natural segue into talking about Maggie Smith. Maggie Smith is an interesting actress for someone of our age, Brad, because I'll be 100% honest. My first exposure to Maggie Smith was as Professor McGonagall in the first Harry Potter film.
Oh, yeah.
I did not know, obviously, as an 11-year-old, that she was an Oscar-winning actress. And to this day, I've never seen the movie that she won her Best Actress Oscar for back in the 1960s.
What kind of a cinephile are you, Bob?
I know, right? Well, a lot of her films are just like, I don't want to say lost to time, but certainly like relics of a certain era. And they just, like, I don't know anyone that's talking about Maggie Smith's 1960s films anymore. However, I had this interesting thing, Brad, where it was like, I was talking to somebody about Paul Newman the other day. And how his last movie, Road to Perdition, is one of my favorite Paul Newman movies. And by the time you get to that film, Paul Newman looks so old. Like, I think he was only 75, but he looked like he was 90. And it was the same thing. We were just talking about this with somebody on one of our recent episodes, how Richard Harris in Harry Potter was like 68 and he looked 90. It's just one of those things where I'm only used to Maggie Smith looking old. And when she hit Harry Potter, she looked old. And now she just looks like an older version of that. Mm-hmm. Sister Act is in this weird zone where it's like, I know what young Maggie Smith looks like now because I've seen enough pictures of her old movies. And she's right in between young Maggie Smith and old Maggie Smith. And it almost looks like a completely different person because I only know her old face. I don't know if that makes sense to you or not, but like, I was shocked at how young she looked in this movie. And it was only not even 10 years before the first Harry Potter movie.
Yeah, no, she's not allowed to look young, Bob.
No, she has to look old forever.
Forever and ever. I think that I went through this weird phase during while I was watching Sister Act where I imposed her older face on her in my brain where I was like, oh yeah, she's clearly like in her 70s. And then I like actually looked at her and I was like, oh, she looks like she's maybe like 48, 50 in this film. And that is way younger than she's allowed to be. Just so much younger.
I feel so weird talking about it like this, but it's like I've never seen her in a film where she isn't old. She's made so many movies, even this century, and I've seen most of them. She's old in every one of them, Brad. She's not old here.
Yeah. I don't want to, completely correct you, but her award-winning movie was Best Actress in a Supporting Role in California Suite from 1978, starring Jane Fonda and Alan Alda.
So she must have been nominated. She made this movie back in the 60s, and I only know the name of it because it's an interesting name for a movie. It's called The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie.
Oh.
And I thought she won Best Actress for that. She must not have, but I know she was for sure nominated.
Yeah. Yeah, at the end of the day, she is an incredible actress. She just has like capital P presence when she is on screen. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And I think she does a great job in this film.
I agree, man. And I think that in lesser hands, this is just kind of like your standard bitchy role until she's not bitchy anymore. You know what I mean? But like from the beginning of the film, she doesn't seem like she doesn't come across as a taskmaster, even though the other nuns are like, a little bit intimidated by her, and she clearly like runs a tight ship and she's regimented. She always seems to have a soft side. She always seems to be a caring person. And I think that to be able to infuse so much of that into the character non-verbally, because it doesn't necessarily come across in the script, it really is a great performance. And I'm sure that she was at a place in her career in the early 90s where she was kind of just looking for work and looking for a movie that she could take home a paycheck. And like, this seems like one of those films, but actors like her and like Michael Caine, who were doing paycheck movies at this time, I think it says a lot about them that when you're watching the movie, it doesn't seem like they're cashing in. They're not phoning it in. They're not just here for a paycheck. Like, is this Shakespeare? No, but she's giving a really good performance in this movie.
Yeah, I mean, this is the working generation of actors that looks down on these young, spoiled people, right? like these people have been acting since they were children. They've been trained most likely in, English theater. And that, like, you can tell that regardless of the role that they take on, they're going to take it seriously. Whether it's, Michael Caine in Batman or in Secondhand Lions.
Right.
Like,
and that's what I'm saying. Like, Michael Caine, when he's making Dirty Rotten Scoundrels in the late 80s with Steve Martin, or when he's doing Muppet Christmas Carol, like, at the time, people are looking at that and saying, like, I can't believe this man is acting with Muppets.
Yeah.
And here we are 20 whatever years later after the Muppet movie came out, and we're like, oh, this might be the best iteration of Ebenezer Scrooge ever put on film.
Yeah.
Like, that's how seriously the man took it.
Yeah. And I think that you see that here with Maggie Smith. My favorite parts with her are near the end of the film when she's engaging with Whoopi on a level of an equal, and you can see in her eyes how she looks at Whoopi and the other nuns and the respect that she has for them. Like, there's just a talent there that not many actresses could have in this role specifically.
All right, I want to talk a little bit about Whoopi Goldberg, and I want to set the stage by kind of talking about what it's like revisiting Whoopi at her peak. Because now I think most people only know her for being on The View. Like, she's been on The View for 10 years probably. And she doesn't really act in movies anymore. Every now and then she'll turn up. She made a cameo in the Color Purple movie that just came out a few months ago. But like, she's not really acting anymore. And so, we look at her the way we look at like Shaq and Charles Barkley on the inside the NBA. You know what I mean? Where it's like, I know them as a broadcaster now. And then you go back and you watch Charles Barkley like annihilating people during his career. And you're like, oh yeah, it's the same guy.
Yeah.
I also think there's a level of like, for people our age who came of age after Whoopi had already had her peak, I think sometimes she gets lumped in with almost like novelty acts of the 90s. Like people look at like Carrot Top and Whoopi as if they're like the same kind of thing. And that's not accurate at all. Like, she was a very famous comedian, but she was also a really well-respected actress. I mean, she won an Oscar. She was nominated for at least one more. And then you turn on a movie like this, and it's her coming off of the high of winning an Oscar and returning to comedy again. And the charisma, dude, is just off the charts. Like, I couldn't believe how good she is in this movie, Brad.
Yeah, she commands the camera whenever it is on her, and she has an ability to be incredibly disarming, and the way she kind of interweaves herself with the other characters is just really incredible. And the movement from the start of the film of being very selfish and very, me-oriented till the end of the film, where you can tell that she has been changed by the nuns that she's lived with, feels like a genuine transformation. And I think there's something really meaningful about that, especially for the fact that they don't actually show Whoopi like, I mean, I guess there's a moment in the film where she's like scrubbing down graffiti and things like that. But for the most part, they don't show her growing in her self-discipline and things like that. You just kind of assume like, okay, the month has gone by and clearly she's grown up a little bit because she is not nearly as childish as she was at the start.
I just love that at each phase of her character, the way she acts the character is totally believable. Like when she's standing up to the guys in the nightclub at the beginning of the movie and a little bit sassy, it's like, oh yeah, she can pull this off. And then for me, the moment that I was like, oh wow, this is actually a great performance is the first time she goes into choir practice. And she's kind of forced to go there after hearing how bad the choir is. And they ask her to kind of lead a song or help conduct a song. And she puts all the singers where they need to be. And she starts walking them through what it means to perform and how to stand and how to project your voice. And it is such a naturalistic. It's like she was meant to be a teacher. You know what I mean? I felt like I was in a classroom, like watching somebody. You know, Brad, I did choir in high school and in college. I know you did choir, at least in high school.
Yep.
Whoopi's not much of a conductor. Like, her hands don't actually do what you're supposed to do when you conduct. But in terms of presence and teaching ability, it transported me back to like some of my favorite memories from doing choir when I was growing up. It's so natural for her to slip into. And it sounds so silly to say, like, why wasn't she nominated for anything for this kind of dumb comedy? But that's the reason this movie works. That's the reason this movie made $250 million. Like, she's just that good.
Yeah, there's a natural feel to the way that she brings the character to life that is just really endearing. And I think that's the biggest difference, I would say, from like her current persona. Because if I'm being very frank, Bob, the Whoopi Goldberg of The View is very caustic overall, right? Like, whether or not you find yourself more liberal or more conservative, she definitely puts herself out there in a very, very strong way. And so most people know her as being very liberal. And I feel like that's the one thing people know about her, is that she's just liberal host on The View. And you don't necessarily see the charming aspect of who she is and who she was, or how she was able to comport herself in these films. And I think that for me was the big thing I took away. I was like, man, she is incredibly charming and deserving of the stardom that she had.
Yeah, I mean, it gets me back to the inside the NBA thing with Shaq.
Yes.
Like, when you're watching Shaquille O'Neal as a commentator, there's moments where he's kind of goofy and he does his little bits. But when they're like, Shaq, what did you think of Giannis tonight? He's very flat. He's very monotone. He doesn't really have a lot of charisma and personality. And I think it's kind of the same thing with Whoopi. Like, whatever her views are aside, there's just not a lot of personality infused into what she does on The View. And when you see her in her element in a movie like this, there's just such a level of control and comfort in front of the camera. It really was kind of revelatory for me. Brad, let's go ahead and talk a little bit more about the movie itself. I think we can work in some of the supporting characters as we talk. One of the things that I was really worried about is the fish out of water element of the story taking over. And so when she first shows up at the convent and, you know, they ask her to pray over the meal, and it's very clear that she doesn't remember how to pray. And it's this fun little comedic bit. And I smiled, but I didn't laugh, because I think part of me was like, oh my gosh, is this going to be 90 minutes of us chuckling at someone getting Christianity slightly wrong? You know what I mean? Because that doesn't make for a good movie. I don't want to do that. I'm so glad that there's the 2 or 3 obligatory things, and then they're done with it. And then she's acclimating and people are already accepting of her. So there's not a lot of conflict there. There's not a lot of strained jokes. And I think that was probably my biggest fear going into the movie. And at least for me, I have to say they did a good job hitting what needed to be hit and then moving on.
And not only hitting what they needed to hit, they also portray nuns in a very positive light. Mm-hmm. And I really appreciated that. Mm-hmm. I don't know if a movie like that would get made nowadays. Like, everybody has to have their dark side and you know, how they've done poorly. And at the end of the day, these are just a bunch of nuns who are living simply and, you know, want to make the world a better place.
Yep.
And you see the positive impact that they have on Whoopi. And I just felt like the positive portrayal of Christianity was refreshing to me.
Yeah. And not even just of Christianity itself, but just of like, whether or not you agree with Christianity, whether or not you're a Christian, like the idea that these people who live this sort of ascetic life have something to teach us. Mm-hmm. Like, you know what I mean? At the end of the movie, they basically say like, hey, she's one of us at this point. She's a nun. But even if Whoopi had never become a nun at the end of the movie, like the idea that they are still imparting good and noble things, I think that's the thing that sticks out to me is, oh, if this movie got made today, it wouldn't be as earnest. Yeah. And the earnestness is honestly what makes the movie work. Yes,
100%. It's the idea that not only are they imparting good things to her, but she's helping reform them some as well. Mm-hmm. And they're kind of meeting in the middle in bringing things forward a little bit, but also staying true to who they've been as a convent. And the earnestness with which they interact with each other is what makes the movie so fun. And, you know, there's the obvious reluctance of Dolores at the start of the film. But man, these nuns are so charming that her transition to enjoying them is so believable because I enjoy these nuns so much.
Mm-hmm. All right, so we've been praising this movie pretty profusely here. I have to say, man, what is going on with the very weird and eclectic neighborhood that they're in San Francisco? Because it's a convent that's across the street in one scene from a bar, and we'll talk about the bar itself because that's another wild endeavor. But then the next day, they look across the street after she confronts Maggie Smith and says, like, we need to go out into the world and help people. And, like, the bar's not there anymore, and it's been replaced overnight by, like, an old rundown, like, adult video store or something.
Yep.
And there's both bikers and what seems to be homeless and drug addicts, but also stylish teens walking around. Like,
yeah.
And then, like, people start wandering in off the street, and, like, the first people that come in are the stylish teens, and then the second people that come in are, like, the whitest couple I've ever seen wearing, like, you know, Cosby sweaters.
Yep.
What's going on here?
Man, it's a cross-section of America, Bob.
San Francisco, a true melting pot.
Yeah. I think that the edges of this film are where things start to fray and fall apart.
Mm-hmm.
There's just so much of this movie where you're kind of like, okay, I'm focused on the nuns, but if I really took time to think about it, what the hell is going on here?
Well, I think nowhere is that more evident than just like everything Whoopi's character does is like designed to draw as much attention as possible, when her entire purpose is like, you need to be laying low. And I understand that's the point of the movie and from whence the conflict comes. But also, like, you know, it gets to the point where she has done such a good job of reforming this choir, and it's such a big draw that she's on the news now. And, you know, thank God Harvey Keitel doesn't see her on the news. And then they're like, the Pope's coming. And Maggie Smith, who's the only other person who knows who Whoopi Goldberg actually is, tells Whoopi that she doesn't want to do the modern concert for the Pope. Mm-hmm. Not because it will draw attention and get her killed, but just because she's in her feels about not being in control. And it's like, did neither of you think about the fact that maybe being next to the Pope will get too many cameras on you? Like, it just seems like they drop the whole witness protection aspect of the movie whenever they want to, and they pick it back up whenever they want to.
Yeah, it's a ridiculous. I guess I would say there's some plot contrivances. Things happen because they need to happen.
Yeah.
Also, like, you know, maybe we shouldn't have her singing publicly with the Pope around and gangsters.
That's what I'm saying. Like, no one bats an eye at that. No one bats an eye at her being up front and center on the altar every Sunday.
Yeah, I you know. It's a movie, Bob.
It's definitely. I had to tell myself that 8 times watching this. I was like, you know what? Yes. It's just a movie. It's fun. Let them be.
Speaking of another thing that kind of felt sideways to me, I watched this film, and Bill Nunn plays the lieutenant who helps keep her safe. They pronounce his name as Eddie Salva throughout the entire film. Salva, S-A-L-V-A. When I looked his name up in IMDb, it's Eddie Souther.
Mm-hmm.
What's up with that, Bob?
I don't know. I watched the movie with subtitles on, as I do with most films, because I'm an old man. And I think it's one of those things where, like, when you see it spelled out and then you hear them saying Salva, you can see how they're like, oh, I think they're saying Souther.
Yeah.
But if I had them off, I'm with you, man. Like,
yeah.
And I would have thought that it would be like Souther, not Souther. But
yeah, yep.
But regardless,
nope, Salva.
Brad, pop quiz for you. Do you remember where we have seen Bill Nunn before?
Was he in Point Break?
Maybe.
I can't remember. All I can remember about Bill Nunn is that he has the most prominent cheekbones of any human being ever to exist, and it's incredible.
So the one that
Bob, what is he from?
The one that I was thinking of is that he plays the very impactful character Radio Raheem in Do the Right Thing.
Oh, yes. Dude, Radio Raheem. What a character.
Yeah. So this is just a couple years after that. So I think most people would probably know him from that. And then he shows up as a cop in this movie.
As a cop.
In a very ironic way.
If there's anything that like signifies the importance of taking a paycheck acting job, it's like I went from this iconic like F the police role and now I'm a police officer.
The true Ice-T track. He's on it.
I wonder how Spike Lee felt about him taking that role.
That's a great question, man. All right, Brad, before we go to break, there's three more people in the cast that I want to talk about. Two of the nuns. Wendy McKenna, who plays Mary Robert, the kind of shy, mousy one. She does a really good job, I think. But the one that was a star-making role was Kathy Najimy as Sister Mary Patrick. I think she's really, really good here. And this is what kind of sets her up on a course to be in like one of apparently everyone's favorite childhood movies, which was Hocus Pocus. Yeah, I think they're both really, really good. And I think this is the early 90s era of small supporting roles being like your shining performances of a movie. I just really love that kind of thing here.
Yeah, there are so many great little performances by the nuns that kept me interested and involved throughout the entire film. I think especially standing out for me was Mary Wicks as Mary Lazarus. Mm-hmm. She just killed me because the transition for her from feeling kind of left out and excluded to like one of the team eating ice cream with the girls at midnight, she just was so charming and funny in a way that only an old white nun could be.
Well, then finally you have Harvey Keitel, who, again, I was aware of this movie, Brad. I thought that I knew what this movie was going to be. I had no idea Harvey Keitel was in this movie, and he's like one of the lead roles. This comes out the same year that he makes Reservoir Dogs. And I think it's one of those, like, I had a moment of epiphany about how things get funded in Hollywood. Because in our Reservoir Dogs episode, we talked a lot about how at this stage of his career, Harvey Keitel really was like a benefactor for a lot of independent filmmakers. He is the reason Reservoir Dogs gets made. He's the reason Quentin Tarantino has a career right now. And then I watch him in a movie like this, and I'm like, this is why Reservoir Dogs got made. Like, yep. This paid for him to help pay for Reservoir Dogs. And because of that, we have Quentin Tarantino. And it's just this really cool chain of events. And it hit me at the end of the movie when he was chasing her through a casino. And I just wonder, if Quentin Tarantino ever goes back and watches this movie and sees this man chasing a nun through Reno, Nevada, and thinks, because of this scene, I have a career.
Yeah, 100%. Harvey is one of those characters or one of those actors that, like, I've known his name since I was a child. I literally watched this film and did not know that was Harvey Keitel. Like,
how's that? I feel like he's one of the most distinct looking and sounding actors too.
Oh, that's crazy to me, dude. He looked like generic Italian guy number 7. Literally the only thing that stuck out to me about his performance was that Viggo Mortensen in Green Book mimicked every intonation. Like even at the start, he's wearing a white beater that like is one of those weirdly thick ones that I remember Viggo wearing in Green Book. And I'm like, there's got to be something here, man. Like, I think Viggo watched Sister Act for notes on how to play his character.
I just think it's so funny that you don't know Harvey Keitel to see him. Because to me, it's like when Willem Dafoe pops up in something. Like, it's just, and we've seen him in so many movies for this podcast now. I mean, Reservoir Dogs, Pulp Fiction, Taxi Driver, Grand Budapest Hotel. Like, this is at least the 5th one. I'm probably forgetting some too.
That's so funny. You named those and I'm like, oh, he was in that? He was in that?
I can't believe
he was in that?
I'm going to start getting mad at you. We need to stop here. We need to drink some whiskey. What do you say we try this? Go ahead.
Who was he in Grand Budapest?
He was the guy in prison with like the tattoos and he kept flexing his pecs and he helped like murder all those guys to get Ralph Fiennes out of prison.
That was Harvey Keitel?
That was Harvey Keitel, yeah.
That's so funny. Yeah, I would never, ever be able to pick him out of a lineup.
That's crazy. All right, man. Let's drink this whiskey. What do you say?
Let's get to it.
The Love Affair event is on at Whole Foods Market with deals on delicious desires through February 14th. The floral department's in full bloom, so look for savings on double dozen bunches of roses. In the meat and seafood departments, save on animal welfare certified New York strip steaks and sustainable wild-caught lobster tails to make the night sizzle. Gifts from the wellness and beauty department are always a nice touch. And you have to grab those chocolate-dipped strawberries. Make Whole Foods Market your Valentine's Day destination.
This episode is brought to you by Pepsi Wild Cherry. Pepsi Wild Cherry is bursting with delicious cherry flavor and a sweet, crisp taste that gives you more to go wild for. Getting wild may look different these days, but whether it's opting for a solo Friday binge watch or a big night out, everyone can indulge in their wild side with Pepsi Wild Cherry. Also available in Zero Sugar. So grab a Pepsi Wild Cherry and get wild.
All right, today we are checking out O.K.I. Reserve Batch Number 1. Now, you may be familiar with the name O.K.I. if you've been around whiskey circles for a few years. This was a brand that was originally launched by what is now called New Riff Distilling, back when it was first being set up by the Party Source store in Newport, Kentucky. They were launching New Riff, and they decided to call their whiskey O.K.I. This is what they were producing from sourced whiskey while they were waiting on what we now know as New Riff to age. And they called it O.K.I. because it stood for Ohio, Kentucky, and Indiana. They were heavily marketing it there in the tri-state area. It was a really well-loved MGP product. And then New Riff came of age, and they said, we don't need to call this O.K.I. anymore. They abandoned that brand, and now we know that as New Riff. Well, a couple years ago, some people in Cincinnati said, hey, whatever happened to O.K.I., and they bought the brand name. And so now they're sourcing whiskey and releasing it as O.K.I. To my knowledge, it has absolutely nothing to do with New Riff anymore. I don't know if anyone from the original brand even has like a stake in this new company, but they resurrected the brand O.K.I. Bourbon nerds on Instagram freaked out for a couple months and rejoiced heavily. And now, Brad, we have before us their initial offering, which is a blend of at least 5 whiskeys, the oldest of which is, 10 years. The youngest of which is 8 years. The youngest of which is 3 years, but it's almost entirely 8, 9, and 10-year product. It comes in at 100 proof. I am very excited to drink it, Brad, because it looks like just the color on this looks incredible.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And to be clear, I think they said that 99.8% of this is 8, 9, and 10-year whiskey. Mm-hmm. So I am very curious, who was you know how much 3-year-old whiskey we need? 0.2% of this batch.
This tastes too good. We have to put at least a few drops of really crappy whiskey in here.
Yeah. I'm either it's really crappy or it was so distinct that it added something to the other 99.8%. I don't know,
This is one of those things where they were almost done with the blend. And they were man, we've got almost enough to fill 50 barrels.
Yep.
We need 3 gallons of something. And they ran to the store and grabbed, Ancient Age off the shelf or something and threw that in here.
Yes. That's all right. Exactly what happened.
I'm not talking crap about this brand. I'm with you, man. I wonder where the 0.2% of 3-year bourbon came from. Yeah. But what we have in front of us is a blend of low rye, high rye bourbon, rye whiskey, corn whiskey, and light whiskey. So I'm really looking forward to this, man. Let's just dive right in. What are you picking up on the nose, Brad?
This is a really pleasant, interesting nose. There's some orange notes going on, kind of citrusy. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of caramel. For me, it has a really nice fresh bread. My wife has been baking homemade bread a lot lately, and it kind of reminds me of that. And then there's some dark stone fruit that comes through as well. I think I'd probably give it a 7.5 on the nose. Mm-hmm. It's really promising, and I could see it getting better from here, but I'm going to temper it just a little bit.
I'm kind of in the same place, although it's promising because I can already tell how well crafted it seems, and I can tell they're using well-aged stock here. A few seasons back, a lot of seasons back, Brad, I can't remember exactly when we did it. We had, we did an episode on how to make an old-fashioned which in retrospect, it's like, how was that a whole episode? That's like a 30-second process. But we featured these syrups from a company called Proof Syrups.
Yeah.
And this smells exactly like that. It smells like an old fashioned in a glass. I get a ton of orange peel. I get some cherry. I get like, I don't know, like if it's brown sugar syrup or demerara, there's a little bit of bitters and spice to this. It just smells like a really good old fashioned. And I think I'm with you. It's promising. I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10 on the nose.
When I got into the palate here, it had some really beautiful notes of toffee. There was cinnamon, clove, cherry. And I almost kind of, like, when you put it all together, it almost kind of felt like a Sour Patch Kid type of vibe. There's a lot of stuff going on here. It's decently complex. I think I'll give it an 8 out of 10 on the taste.
All right, Brad, I took 2 sips because I wasn't entirely sure where I wanted to go after the first one. I think the first thing I'll say, I try not to make mouth sounds on this podcast, but right now I'm salivating so much because this drink's hotter than 100 proof for me. Like, it was really spicy and prickly on my tongue. The ethanol was definitely present. It doesn't have a ton of chest burn going down, but I think on the palate, it presents like a higher proof whiskey. I definitely get notes of that old-fashioned thing. I get a lot of cherry on this. On the first sip, when I went to swallow, it turned really almost bitter. Like, it was heavily, heavily charred and almost like a tobacco flavor for me. So I took a second sip to see if maybe it was just me getting acclimated. I think it was, but I still wouldn't say that this finishes sweet. Did it for you?
No, it does not finish sweet. I think that it finishes really spicy, and I like that a lot. There, like on the finish for me, there's tobacco, there's clove, there's the cherry kind of sticks around, but it's more of a dark cherry that's almost bitter a little bit. I thought that the finish was spectacular. That's where I'm going to give my highest score at an 8.5.
I think I'm just going to go at a 7 for both the taste and the finish. It was a little bit different than what I was expecting from the nose, and I wish there had been a little bit more of that fruity complexity that we got on the nose. It really just it tipped into more of like spices and bitters for me, and not enough of that overarching cherry and orange. So when it comes to balance, I think it's well balanced, but there was definitely a fall off for me. Still, I think this is a really good whiskey. I'm going to give it a 7.5 on balance.
I'm at an 8 on balance. Probably very similar notes. I think that there's a lot of really complex flavors going on here that pair together really nicely.
All right, when it comes to the price on this, according to Breaking Bourbon, which is what we use for a lot of our information on these whiskeys, the MSRP was $75. Now, again, I need to say, $75 sounds like a lot of money, and it is objectively a lot of money to pay for a whiskey. But they're using 10-year bourbon, 8-year bourbon, 9-year bourbon. They're sourcing it from all these different places. They're blending it. Like, this is a very labor-intensive sourced whiskey. I think objectively, at what it would cost them to make this and what the market dictates, $75 is not unfair. I also think there's a lot of whiskeys I prefer to this at $75, but at the end of the day, for me, this category is more about, is this priced fairly or not? And I think it is priced fairly, so I'm going to give it a 7 out of 10 on value.
Yeah, I was literally in the same spot. 7 out of 10. This is pretty good value. I think if you got this bottle for like $65, $70, it'd be like a 9 out of 10 value. So not the worst thing to spend with aftermarket value and things like that.
All right, Brad, I'm coming out to a 36.5 out of 50 on this. Where are you at?
I'm at a 39 out of 50.
Oh, wow. Okay. I thought you were going to be like significantly higher than me based on some of your scores, but that's bringing us to a 75.5 out of 100 or a 37.75 out of 50. I think that's a perfect place for this. It's definitely a recommend for me, but it's just sitting below that 40 out of 50 mark where we really start to rave about something.
Yeah, this is on the edge of being great, but as it is, this is a really solid whiskey that if you and a buddy wanted to go in on together, you will not regret the money that you spend.
You know what it was that kept this from being a 40 out of 50, Brad?
What's that, Bob?
It was that 0.2% 3-year.
Yeah, that was it, man. If
could
they
taste
had
it.
only. Oh, man. Well, what say you, Bob? How about we get back into talking about Sister Act?
Let's get to it, Brad.
Introducing Royal Caribbean's newest ship, Icon of the Seas, the ultimate family vacation. The ultimate 6 slides, 8 neighborhoods, 0 compromise vacation. The ultimate never done that, can't wait to do it vacation. The ultimate chillin' by a different pool every day of the week vacation. This is the Icon of Vacations. Icon of the Seas, arriving in 2024. Book today. Come seek the Royal Caribbean. Ships Registry, Bahamas.
All right, everybody. That was O.K.I. batch number 1, a whiskey that almost knocked our socks off, Bob.
Almost. My socks
Came close.
are dangling right now, but they're not off.
That sounds dirty.
Hey, man, you're the one that put that image in people's minds.
Well, Bob, I think it is time for us to get into our next segment of the day, Canada's favorite, 2 Facts and a Falsehood.
Brad is gonna try to stump you, Bob, to our right and what is wrong. 2 facts and a falsehood.
2 Facts and a Falsehood is the part of the podcast where Brad presents me with 3 items about the making of this movie, which he presents as fact, one of which is a complete falsehood, fabrication, fib, and lie, and I have to figure out which one that is. Brad, I think I'm sitting at 2-2 right now on the season.
You sure are.
I got a little haughty, a little full of myself, and I have plummeted from 2-0 to 2-2.
Yeah, I think you need to spend some time in silence, reflecting on your life.
I need to do penance.
Inquiring of the Lord.
Yes.
Do some penance. Yeah.
All right, well, I have said 4 Hail Marys and however many Our Fathers, and Brad, hit me with your 2 facts and a falsehood.
Fact number 1, an opening scene shows Dolores as a young girl, played by Isis Carmen Jones. Later the same year, Jones played a de-aged version of Goldberg's character Guinan in the Star Trek The Next Generation. Fact number 2, Dolores' girl group is named the Renolds, a combination of 2 female singing groups from the 1960s, the Runners and the Benols. Fact number 3, when Eddie takes Dolores to the church, she asks him, "What am I going to be, Quasimodo in the Bell Tower?" An obvious reference to Victor Hugo's classic The Hunchback of Notre Dame. Mary Wicks, who plays Mary Lazarus, later played a singing gargoyle in Disney's The Hunchback of Notre Dame.
That is true. I know that for a fact because I recognized her voice while I was watching the movie last night, and I looked her up on IMDb. So,
look at you.
She did play a gargoyle. So it's 1 or 2. And I got so excited about saying number 3 that I forgot what both of them are.
The young version of Whoopi at the start of the film.
That's 1.
Yep. And then the second one was just about the name of her girls group being from groups in the 60s and 70s.
I think it is more likely that number 1 is false. However, that girl looked so much like Whoopi Goldberg that I want to believe that that is true. I could not believe how much she looked like Whoopi Goldberg.
Yeah, it was very impressive.
I'm going to say 2 is the falsehood just because I want 1 to be true.
Well, Bob, the wishes of your heart have come true. Number 1 is true, and number 2 is the falsehood.
All right.
Look at you.
All right, now, did you make up everything about that fact, or did you just tweak something?
Fact about the falsehood?
About the falsehood, yeah.
She did make it as a combination of groups, but the name of the group in the movie is not the Renolds, and there's no such groups as the Runners or the Benols. It is all false.
Nice.
As false can get, Bob.
There you go. You know what? We have not mentioned the singing group that she's in at the beginning of the movie, singing in a Reno nightclub.
Okay, what is going on there?
I thought it was really funny, and I loved at the end where she's saying her goodnights, and in between words, she's just like, "You don't give a shit."
Yep.
I laughed really hard at that moment.
Yeah, the part of it that I didn't understand was it felt like there was conflict between her and her singing mates. like her backups, that just felt weird. And I guess maybe we just didn't have enough movie to establish what was going on there. But that part felt really weird. The part of her heckling the audience was lovely. Mm-hmm. That just made me laugh because nobody gave a crap.
You know what it reminded me of? It reminded me of the opening to Mrs. Doubtfire the following year, where it opens up on him doing that voice work where he's singing Figaro.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
It's almost exactly the same. It's like a comedian doing their shtick and flopping really hard. And that's how you open your movie. I really loved it. I don't know that I thought that there was conflict between her and the other two singers, but what weirded me out was how she kept being like, let's speed this up so we can get out of here. And then the music would speed up, but like they were clearly singing to a tape. And so I don't understand, like, who's speeding up, Whoopi? Like, the singers can't do anything about it. Like, I don't understand what's going on here. In any case, it worked really well. I also love the conceit of it being set in Reno instead of Vegas, because it shows, like, how far she has fallen, I guess, that she's like a performer in Reno instead of Vegas. And it says a lot about Harvey Keitel being like a small time player. Like, he's not a Vegas gangster. He's a Reno gangster.
Yep.
But they also get to double dip on why it's a good thing, because they can then shoot their movie in Reno, which is significantly cheaper to shoot in than Vegas. So it's like a win-win.
Yeah, 100%. It sets things up, especially for the end of the film when Harvey Keitel is getting arrested and he looks at Whoopi and he goes, I gave you a career. and like everybody knows she did not have a career as a nightclub singer in Reno.
There's a great line that Harvey Keitel had at the end of the movie. And, you know, the movie gets even more preposterous at the end because she should have been dead 11 times over. And they just kept being like, oh, we can't shoot a nun. And they go and they tell Harvey Keitel, we can't shoot a nun. And he goes, she's just a broad. She's a broad in a costume. And they're like, well, how do you know? And he's like, listen to me. I know this woman in a biblical sense. She's not a nun. And just the way he delivers in a biblical sense made me laugh so hard.
It's perfect, man. It's literally perfect. But that's one of the things about this film is it is a comedy, but I don't know if this isn't a bad thing, the thing I'm about to say. It didn't make me laugh a ton.
No, it was more like cute and clever than it was laugh out loud funny. And I think that actually is part of the key to its success, because if they had gone for more laughs, that means that they would have, it wouldn't have been a PG movie. It would have been dirtier. And it also would have made the nuns the butt of more jokes.
Yep.
And I think we've already established, like, the sort of Disney-ness of this whole thing. Like, this fits right in with a movie like Cool Runnings for me, which is like, you know what I mean? Like, we're going to poke a little bit of fun at Jamaicans, but not a whole lot of fun, because that would be offensive. It's kind of like that. Like, it's inoffensive. It's cute. It's something you can watch on a weekend afternoon and pay matinee prices and then walk out of the theater and look at whoever you went with and say, that was cute. And then they have your money. Like, this is a perfect matinee movie.
Yeah. And honestly, Bob, you literally just segued me perfectly into my Let's Make It a Double.
Hey, I never do that. That's exciting.
Yeah, you nailed it, man.
Well, let me give the intro here. So first of all, we have a theme song. Let's play the theme song for our last segment of the day. Let's make it a double.
We're near the end of the episode, so thanks for listening to the Film and Whiskey Show. Let's pair another film with this one, even if it's a struggle. It's our final segment of the day, now let's make it a double.
Let's Make It a Double is the part of the show where we pick a movie to pair up with this one to make the perfect double feature. Brad, it sounds like I have spoiled yours already.
Yeah, and Bob, you are either going to be really happy or really angry that I bring this up. I think that the perfect movie to pair this with, as you said, matinee, nice, light, just an above average film that is charming. I'm going to pair this with School of Rock.
Aw, boo. I thought you were going to say Cool Runnings.
No.
Oh, what? You duped me.
I think that this and School of Rock are wildly similar films.
For sure.
Like, look at the way Jack Black engages as a teacher is so utterly believable in the same way that Whoopi just falls into the role. I think that there's so much here that feels conjoined. I don't know if School of Rock exists if Sister Act doesn't do so well, 10 years earlier?
Yeah, that's a great point, man. Like, I've never thought about the connection between the two, but that is a fantastic point.
Thank you.
Man, maybe this movie's a 10 out of 10 after all, Brad. It's funny, in the course of this episode, all of the movies that I thought about making my Let's Make It a Double have come out. I think that Cool Runnings is a great example. We mentioned a little bit ago Mrs. Doubtfire. I think that's a really good example, just on like vibes alone.
Yeah.
I think the one that I'm going to actually go with to pair it up thematically is a movie that we have also mentioned, and that is Point Break.
Hey, let's go.
A movie about the most preposterous undercover setting you can think of. We have sent this man undercover in California, no less, to infiltrate bank robbing surfers.
Yep.
So I think you could start your evening out with Point Break, watch your action movie, and then finish your evening on a light note with Sister Act, thematically connected, early 90s mediocrity, and you have a great night,
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, my pick was early 2000s mediocrity. Yours is early 90s mediocrity. We're pretty much in the same place, Bob.
Okay, before we get final scores, there was one more thing I wanted to ask you, and it can be as long or as short as you want to make it. You and I don't often talk about our backgrounds, having been seminarians and working in churches and being pastors, but I did appreciate all the things we said about how this has an ultimately respectful attitude towards the nuns. I want to pick your brain about like them using pop songs in mass and that being like a huge draw to the outside world.
Yeah.
Because A, that's not how any of this works. But B, I feel like this movie was released right at the onset of like the rise of evangelical culture in the United States. Like early Hillsong stuff, like Darlene Zschech and all those people were starting to they were starting to kind of infiltrate. Amy Grant had become mainstream at this point. And I think I've never seen the attitude of evangelicalism so well elucidated in a movie as I have with this movie, which is like, we can dabble in the secular, and because people will see that we're cool and we repurpose the secular, then they'll want to come to church. Where the reality is more like, no, they see you doing a really cheesy version of a song that was good before, and now they don't want to come engage with you. So I guess I was thinking about that a lot while watching this movie. I have no idea if those thoughts ever even crossed your mind, but I'd like to know kind of where you stand on that whole thing and how this movie plays into it.
Yeah, there's definitely that vibe of we're moving a church from traditional service to contemporary service. And if you have ever worked in the ministry, then you'll know that is a huge debate for churches as they go through it. I think that where it kind of hits is what you said. They are representing what a lot of churches were going through at the time. I think where it misses is where the church missed in the idea that would actually draw people in to the church and to a impactful relationship with their creator. At the end of the day, man, you can repackage Justin Bieber lyrics all you want. It's not going to make people love Jesus more. Mm-hmm. And if I can share a personal story. I remember taking my youth group to Winter Jam a few times. I'm sure that you've been to Winter Jam at some point, Bob.
Can you explain what Winter Jam is?
Yeah, it's a giant concert series for Christians.
Yeah.
That happens probably from like November through March every year. Mm-hmm. And they get all the big, Christian artists at the time. I think, a few years when I went, was Switchfoot there? I don't know. There's a bunch of big names. Newsboys. What was the band out of Malone that got popular?
Reliant K.
Yeah, Reliant K. Like, these types of bands are playing. And I remember being there. I took my kids there 2 or 3 years in a row. And I remember looking around, and I was like, there is nothing different going on here than what would happen at a normal concert. Like, we're literally just worshiping artists who are giving us crappier music than what the popular mainstream is putting out. And it just felt kind of weird and
feels like a waste of money, doesn't it?
Yeah, and not in line with what Christ actually called us to. And it just felt kind of gross to me. Now, I didn't feel that way about Sister Act. That felt charming, and once again, Bob, you started us off at the top of the episode by saying this is something that could only exist in a film,
right?
And that's why for me, them singing Motown hits, but with God instead of another human being as the object of their affection, like yeah, sure, it was charming, it was cute.
Mm-hmm. I also think it's like really ironic that she just introduced like basic gospel chords to this choir. Yeah. And this is something that happens in every black church in America every Sunday. And they are not, like, white people aren't wandering in off the street to go see them. But the minute it happens with nuns, they're like, what is this music? Which opens up a whole other can of worms.
We don't talk about that, Bob.
We don't talk about that, man. I thought that in those scenes, though, where they're singing these updated Motown songs, the only thing that really sold it for me, though, was Kathy Najimy's character, because she, like, Sister is worshiping. Like, she was feeling it, and I was like, oh, maybe this is effective after all. I don't know.
Perhaps.
And on that note, Brad, I'm going to give my final score. This movie is a 7 out of 10. It's kind of a 6.5, but it's a 7. It's like a really soft 7 that is everything I said. A great matinee movie that aspires to be nothing more than that, and yet has performances in it that belong in a 10 out of 10 movie. And that's kind of the only reason that it even hits a 7 for me. So it's a 7, and I give it a thumbs up, and I recommend, and all those things. But, like, we're not doing, like, the greatest films of all time this season, Brad. So, like,
no.
Just bear that in mind.
Yeah. I agree with you, Bob. I think this is a 7 out of 10 movie. One aspect we have not mentioned a single time, Bob. This isn't quite a 90-minute film, but it is a 100-minute film. And that is close enough for me to say, if this movie was any longer, it would drag on. But at an hour and 40 minutes, it is entirely palatable, easy to digest. I am a big fan of this movie. 7 out of 10.
There you go. All right, that does it for us today, but we'd like to know what you think of Sister Act. We also have never seen the sequel, Sister Act 2, that has Lauryn Hill. I've seen clips from that movie. Tell us if we should watch that one. I might check it out. You can find us on all of our social media accounts, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, @FilmWhiskey.
Or you can join our Discord. We are on the Discord every single day talking to you guys, the fans of the Film and Whiskey podcast. So if you want to join the conversation, you can find a link at the end of every single one of our show notes.
Next week, Brad, we are getting back into the realm of movies that are fondly remembered, because we're looking at a film that I keep seeing people talk about on Twitter as perhaps one of the great thrillers and one of the great action films of all time. A movie that may be perfect. 1993's The Fugitive. So join us for that one next week. But until then, I'm Bob Book.
I'm Brad G.
And we'll see you next time.